I remember I was sitting on a chicken coop in South Dakota, and I watched the hawks flying. And these hawks would go, oh, they'd be maybe 1,000 feet or more. And they'd see a little chicken in our yard and they'd zoom down. I thought, oh, I could only do that.
Ever since man looked up into the sky and watched a bird wing its way through the clouds, he has dreamed of taking flight. And on December 17, 1903, in Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, those dreams were finally realized. Women, like men, had been having those dreams of flight too, but they would soon discover, as they had throughout history, that while those opportunities were handed to men, women would have to fight to get theirs. Some of the earlier women pioneers in flight had to literally sneak onto the airfield. On September 2, 1910, Blanche Stewart Scott, without the permission or knowledge of Glenn Curtis, the airplane's owner, removed the small wooden wedge from the wheels of his plane, and without any flying lessons, got the plane airborne, thus becoming the first American woman to pilot an airplane. One by one, women began to take matters into their own hands and to break the stereotype of the male-only pilot.
And all of a sudden, I just couldn't stand it anymore. I said, I'm going to learn to fly. And my girlfriend said, oh, you must be crazy. And I said, no, I'm not. So I went up to the guy that had owned the airport at the time. And I said, Clyde, I said, I want to learn to fly. He says, come on, I think you'll make a damn good pilot. So that's how it started.
In the late 1920s, a woman aviator was elevated to celebrity status. Amelia Earhart had all the makings of a superstar. She was smart, attractive, well-spoken, and like her fellow female aviators, had a passion for pushing the envelope and breaking barriers. In May 1932, Amelia became the first woman to fly solo across the Atlantic. In January 1935, she was the first person, man or woman, to fly solo from Hawaii to the American mainland. Tragically, her historic career was cut short when, in 1937, she was lost over the Pacific Ocean in the final legs of her attempt to fly around the world. Amelia wasn't the only woman soaring high in the 1920s and 30s. In 1921, Bessie Coleman became the first African-American, male or female, to earn a pilot's license. 10 years later, Catherine Chung became the first Chinese-American woman to get a pilot's license. In 1936, Louise Thadden and Blanche Noyes beat male pilots in the Bendix Trophy race, the first victory of women over men in a race in which both men and women could enter. As the 1930s came to an end, World War II loomed on the horizon, and with it would be written a new chapter in the history of American women aviators. On Sunday, December 7th, 1941, Pearl Harbor was attacked, and America went to war.
That was on Sunday when we were attacked. So on Monday, I sent a wire to Washington, D.C. I told them I had my private pilot's license, that I'd be willing to serve. I got a call from Jacqueline Cochran that they were going to start a program in Sweetwater, Texas, that I was one of the people that would be accepted.
The WASPs, it stands for Women Air Force Service Pilots. They were a group of women who actually flew military aircraft from the time frame of 1942 to 1944, and a lot of people don't know a thing about them. There were two particular historical women aviatrix, Jacqueline Cochran and Nancy Harkness Love, that really were responsible, I think, for creating the WASPs. Like Jackie Cochran was a woman that had set records, speed records, distance records on her own, started from nothing, in poverty and ended up becoming one of the most famous women pilots in our history.
1,800 women from across the country came to Texas to serve their country and be part of the newly formed WASP.
It was a very stiff program, and I think the reason it was so difficult was because they were trying to prove that women could do the job. And let me tell you, we did prove it. Our safety record was just a fraction better than the men. And to break into an all-male world like we did was very interesting. A lot of the girls couldn't take the backlash talking and how the guys felt about it and everything. And being a very stubborn Russian, I just wouldn't let that bother me. I had a job to do. I loved to fly, and I had the privilege of flying the P-51, which was the fastest plane made at the time.
They had to get to the training area, which was in Big Spring, Texas. They got there on their own, and if they were killed in an accident or something, their family had to pay for them to be taken back home. They just had no rights whatsoever, but they were the happiest women. They loved what they did. They volunteered to do it. They wanted to serve. They really pleaded with the government to let them serve and let them fly airplanes. And at first, people didn't think they could fly airplanes. And of course they could, and they did a great job. And when you meet these women, you see the spirit that they have. They were just amazing.
As the war was drawing to a close, the male pilots started to return stateside. The military decided it no longer required the service of these patriotic women. One day, the WASP program just ceased to be.
I've heard stories from some of these WASPs that I've been to conventions with that are still alive. There's about 300 or so still alive. And they said one day they were disbanded and they were said to go home. And there were no tickets provided. They had to do that at their own expense. They were not given veteran status. They were not given military status. They never did. They were similar to civil service workers in their position. And they were just said, go home. So they had to, many of them actually even hitchhiked home or caught a ride, packed up, and it wasn't a pretty day. So I think that that part of this entire program is what really took a long time to fix.
It would take another 35 years before the WASP were to officially receive what they should have been given at the war's end.
It was not until 1977, after they disbanded in 1944, that they received recognition, military recognition. And then it took until 1979 for them to receive veteran status. That is, they were considered that they had served and they had veterans benefits, everything that they should have had a long time ago.
Around the time the WASP were awarded veteran status, another generation of female aviators was in the midst of a new battle for acceptance and equality in the armed forces.
From the time that the first military women pilots, the WASP, were in the Air Force, it took until 1973 for the Navy first to open up training for women again. Then it took, the Coast Guard was about the same year. The Air Force was 1976. The Marines never gave in for a while. It took a little longer. It took that long for our country to be ready to allow women to train in military service again as pilots and navigators. And also the Air Force academies all opened up their doors to women in 1976. So the 70s really was the decade, I think, of change. And of course, I joined the Air Force in 1975, and I was a part of that.
When the Air Force opened up fighter pilot training to women in 1976, they accepted only 10 women a year into the program, while they were accepting 2,000 men a year into the pilot program.
It was a quota program, and you had to be in the service, and you had to submit an application, a special application, and it was highly, highly competitive. It took me from 1976 to 1979 to get in. There were so many other qualified women, even though they were only taking 10 a year, it was just tough.
Once accepted to the program, the obstacles women faced were unique to their male counterparts.
They didn't even have flight suits that really fit us. We had to get flight suits and our shoulders were hanging down here and we had to roll up the pants. The boots were all too big. They just weren't ready for us. When I look back at what I went through and what all women who are going in a male-dominated field go through, you really question your self-esteem every day. You look in the mirror and you go, am I doing the right thing? Can I do this? You know, can I get out there and fly 2 sorties today, formation flying, 3-foot wingtip clearance, extended trail? Can I do this? And a lot of times I frankly doubted myself because I was in a position where I had never been challenged like this before. Pilot training, we joke about it, was the best year of my life. Not really. It was just nothing but work. So I think in looking back on it, you'd really just have to be strong. And you have to start thinking about, okay, I can do this.
Even though the women could now fly fighter jets, they still could not use any of the weapons or fly in combat. It took another 2 decades before women would be given that opportunity. After a long, hard battle, the Combat Exclusion Act was signed into law on April 28, 1993.
I think that there is a long progression from 1944 all the way to 1993 to allow women in the services to be able to be competitive for almost any job. And it did take a long time. I remember the doors were closed for me, and now I look down on the first, Thunderbird pilot who's a woman. I look down on the first fighter wing commander who can be a woman, and I see that all those doors are open. I read stories on the internet about women in combat now flying F-15s, F-16s, and I just remember so recently to me that no woman could do that. And every time I see a story like that, I tell my husband, look at this, look at this. It's a great progression, and I never thought I'd see it, but I'm glad I do now.
Today, women are astronauts, commercial airline pilots, and even fly combat missions. And it all began with the brave women who dreamed of the sky being their limit.
When I was in the service, one day my instructor said, you can go out today and you can do anything you want. And I went out and I was just flying around lazily, looking at the Texas landscape. And I noticed a chicken yard. And I don't know why, but there was just something in me. I zoomed down on that chicken yard, just like that hawk did, that many, many years ago. And the little chickens flew up on the fence. Sometimes your dreams come true in such a different way.
On March 10, 2010, the surviving WASP members journeyed to Washington, D.C., where they were awarded the Congressional Gold Medal for their service during World War II. Over 65 years after they had served, the nation finally, officially acknowledged that the work they had done was indeed second to none.